Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this short video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous night of the local time. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And the most important updates and most important details are coming from the town by the name of Chasiv Yar, where the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt, to cross Seversky Donetsk canal, and to establish a foothold on the Ukrainian side of the same canal. So this is the video that we have. The video was published yesterday in the evening, and the video was published by pro-Ukrainian sources. On this video we can see the Russian personnel carrier crossing canal, and in a second later the Russians landed in the area. The Russian infantry started, let's say, unpacking on this direction, taking under control the trenches and the fortifications in the vicinity of these buildings. Then Ukrainians start bombing and attacking the Russians, and in the final part of the video we see another very interesting episode of how the Russian personnel carrier continue moving further to the northwestern direction, not to the eastern, in the eastern direction, let's say back to Bogdanovka or Bakhmut, but further deep inside of Chasiv Yar. Lots of very interesting let's say things, lots of very interesting thoughts, and let's discuss them in details. First of all, the video was published by pro-Ukrainian sources, and when they published the video they made a short article about the situation, and pro-Ukrainians were saying that the Russians entered this territory accidentally. So they're saying that they don't know for sure where exactly the Russians were moving, but for some reason probably they lost themselves, crossed accidentally canal, let's say landed their infantry in this area, and after the Russian troopers captured these, let's say, tree lines, this forest, a small forest, the Russian armored vehicle or personal carrier continue moving further in the, let's say, northwestern direction. So that was like the road of Russian attack. They crossed this area along these let's say buildings, landed infantry here, and then Russian personal carrier moved further to the northwest, and after that the video ended. So we don't know for sure what exactly happened later. And also the pro-Ukrainian sources who published the video stated that later, a few hours later, days later or minutes later, the entire Russian group was destroyed with FPV drones and artillery strikes, but yet the Ukrainians haven't provided even a single video confirming this. So what we have for now, we have few important things. Of course, if it's true, if this information is correct, if the Russians did manage to break through the Ukrainian defense belt and to enter this part of canal, that means significant progress of the armed forces of Russian Federation and complete collapse of Ukrainian defense belt. Because I'll remind you, during the previous days we got a lot of updates confirming that the Russians, not confirming, but a lot of statements that the Russians managed to cross Seversky Donetsk canal in the southern part. Now we have reports that the Russians managed to do the same in the northern part, so most likely, and according to this configuration, according to this piece of news, the Russians managed to encircle the eastern, let's say, Chasiv Yar, and this situation for the Ukrainians is critical. But once again, the video was published by pro-Ukrainians, the landing operation. Later, the same source reported that the entire Russian group was destroyed, but without providing us any details or any video confirmations of that. Furthermore, we have a lot of different reliable mappers who also stated that the Russians managed to break through to enter the territory, but they're adding that most likely that attack failed. But if you ask my opinion, I would say that we will stick to the facts, and the facts are that the Russians crossed canal and managed to dig in deep. We don't have any videos or any, let's say, reports about destroyed Russian group, or we are not going to wishful think about this territory or some other conclusions based on nothing. So according to the reality, according to the video geolocation, the Russians managed to do this. So let's wait, maybe Ukrainian sources will publish additional videos, but anyway, let's say move further based on this configuration of the front line. Anyway, let's take a look at the video once again. And this video we can see that the Russians entered the territory from Kalinovka, and once again the Russians saw no resistance and no barriers from the Ukrainian side, and no Ukrainian soldiers in the area. And the most important, once again, the final part of the video, after the Russians landed in the area, the Russian personnel carrier moved further to the northwest. So if we say that the Russians had a foothold on this territory, that they managed to capture this area and they basically brought some additional reinforcements on the reserves, the Russian personnel carrier were moving in this direction, direction, which confirms most likely these farms are also under Russian control. For now, we don't have geolocations confirming this, but it's just like something like our conclusion. We are not going to change the map. It's just like the logical progress, logical movement of Russian personal carrier. That means that the Russian car, the Russian vehicle was moving towards Russian positions, not towards the Ukrainian positions, most likely. Anyway, sooner or later we're going to receive more updates and we will understand this. Furthermore, the Russians continue offensive operation in Klishchiivka area. Today we got additional updates of how the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian forces and how the Ukrainians were counterattacking the Russians' FPV drones. For now, the line of combat contact hasn't been changed. Now let's move to Avdiivka area, where we also got significant number of very interesting details. And first let's talk about Novoleksandrivka. During the previous few weeks we were talking a lot about the Russians entering Novoleksandrivka, about the Russians managed to establish control over some 30-20% of the village, but yet we during those days we didn't have any updates confirming this. But today we got the first video, the first geolocated video that was published by pro-Ukrainian sources, which confirms that the Russians answered Novoleksandrivka, and furthermore the Russians managed to move even further deeper inside of the village. For example, in the video that was published by 110th Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, we got, this is an episode on this, for example, part of the video, we can see the Ukrainian FPV drone who was FPV droning the Russian personnel carrier who was moving from Novoleksandrivka to the mainland. So in that video we could see the following picture. The Ukrainian FPV drone attacked the Russian personnel carrier in this area, and the Russians were moving, let's say, after the Russians landed infantry somewhere here. Most likely this part is also under Russian control. The Russian personnel carrier were moving back to in direction of Очеретино, but somewhere here the Russian personnel carrier was damaged and attacked by the Ukrainian FPV drone. So this video is enough for us to adjust the map, and most likely the Russians control around 30-40% of Novoleksandrivka, and the Ukrainians are falling back further to the west. Also, we have additional updates from the line Sokol, Novopokrovska, Semyonovka. The mappers continue updating their maps, showing additional progress of the armed forces of Russian Federation. So, according to information updates we have, all these fields, this artillery pocket that used to be under Ukrainian control was captured by the Russians, and the Russians moving further to the villages. Furthermore, we have report that the Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions in Krasnogorovka. After the Russians captured the central part, the let's say town hall, the Russians during the previous days were mainly concentrated on the Ukrainian artillery systems, Ukraine, let's say, support and supplied. Now the Ukrainians used the most northern part of the town as the main logistic hub. And of course, the Russians are hunting and destroying the Ukrainians. Another bridge was destroyed to the northwest of Krasnogorovka, the bridge that Ukrainians were using for supplying and supporting their forces in the rest of Krasnogorovka, in the north and northwestern part of Krasnogorovka. Very interesting details are coming from South Donetsk direction. As you can see, lots of geolocations, a lot of videos. The most important that the forces of 79th Brigade reported that most likely during the next 2-3 days, if nothing changes, the Ukrainians will abandon their positions in Paraskoevka, and then the Russians will capture the village completely. When talking about the fields, as you can see, more and more updates about the territory, about another destroyed Ukrainian howitzer or another destroyed Ukrainian artillery position or destroyed warehouse, some among the fields. So the Russians continue effective counter-artillery duels. The Ukrainians suffer significant losses, and we can see that Ukrainians can't, let's say, take the initiative and can't break the situation in their favor. Once again, to understand the situation of Ukrainians on this direction, it's better to increase the numbers of days since the beginning of May, which show us the tens of destroyed, let's say, armored vehicles and artillery systems just during the May. Significant superiority from the Russian forces, and no chances for the Ukrainians to restore the, let's say, initiative or to make the situation 50-50. We also received very interesting photo from Donetsk itself. The Russians continue improving their armored vehicles according to new doctrine. We remember that the Russians started, let's say, building turtle tanks by adding additional armor around the tank, and now the Russians start doing the same with motorcycles, because currently this is also becomes a part of Russian, let's say, military forces, a part of Russian doctrine of mobile forces, and they decided to improve the defense of these vehicles by adding additional, let's say, armor to motorcycles as well. So now the Russians are getting even stronger. Now let's let's move back to Sivers's direction. According to different mappers, the Russians, as a result of offensive, managed to improve their positions along the railways, and if we summarize everything, did approximately the territory that was captured by the Russians during the previous days. So significant progress. The Russians are getting closer and closer to Siversk. Siversk is always under very heavy fire, as usual, under very heavy fire. The Russians are bombing this territory with ADAP 1500. So there are still a lot of job to do, lots of, let's say, defense strongholds, strong points in front of Russian, let's say, movements. But anyway, sooner or later, the Russians will reach the first buildings of Siversk, and then most likely this year, the main battle for the stronghold is going to take place. Now we are moving to Vovchansk direction. We have additional reports from the territory. As you can see, there are not so many icons, but the Ukrainians, right before we start making the video, very reliable Ukrainian sources reported that as a result of offensive, a series of counterattacks, the Ukrainians managed to restore their positions in the vicinity of the citadel by taking additional control over some buildings. Also, the Ukrainians managed to restore control to the west of industrial zone, Vovchansk aggregatny plant, and the Ukrainians also, according to information we have, managed to restore control in the eastern part of Vovchansk. So for now, neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians published any updates confirming this piece of information, piece of news, but this is the first statement since the beginning of Kharkiv operation that Ukrainians started counterattacks, and as a result of those counterattacks, they managed to restore some positions. Of course, we're not going to change the map based on that report. We need additional updates, and we need video confirmation of that. Furthermore, we continue receiving reports about the results of strikes that took place during the previous days. The Russians continue hunting the Ukrainian forces with the Lancet, with artillery. For example, on this video, we can see the Ukrainian artillery position, how the Ukrainians were trying to land their artillery system, fully loaded with significant number of artillery rounds, but the Russians discovered, and as a result of Lancet strike, the Russians destroyed the artillery system, howitzer of the armed forces of Ukraine, and then we're going to see, let's see, the secondary detonation and a very heavy explosion. Also, a little bit to the south, in the vicinity of Balakleya, we got the video confirming the results of Russian strike on some camp. If you remember, a few days ago we talked that the Russian attacked Balakleya with Iskander, and as a result of strike, the Ukrainians suffered significant losses. Today we got, as you can see, the video, geolocated video confirming the results of Russian strike with that type of weapon. And that's it for the short video. Military Samurai channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.